Most people believe that when they pursue someone relentlessly, they are acting out of love. They tell themselves that every text message, every attempt to get attention, every effort to stay connected is proof of how deeply they care. But if they are honest with themselves, they often discover something uncomfortable beneath the surface. What drives them is not always love, it is fear. Fear has a remarkable ability to disguise itself as devotion. It can wear the mask of commitment, loyalty, and passion while secretly controlling every decision a person makes. Think about what happens when someone becomes emotionally attached to another person's approval. Their mood begins to rise and fall based on responses they receive. A delayed reply creates anxiety. A short message creates doubt. A moment of distance creates panic. Suddenly, their emotional state is no longer in their own hands. It has been handed over to someone else. This is not the freedom that love creates. This is the dependency that fear creates. Fear whispers that if you do not keep trying, you will be forgotten. It tells you that if you stop reaching out, the connection will disappear. It convinces you that your value depends on how much attention another person gives you. Because of this, many people spend enormous amounts of energy chasing validation instead of building genuine connection. They become focused on avoiding loss rather than creating something meaningful. Real love does not require constant pursuit to prove its existence. Love can move towards someone with openness and sincerity, but it does not lose itself in the process. Fear, on the other hand, constantly seeks reassurance. It demands certainty where certainty cannot exist. It wants guarantees that no relationship can provide. As a result, the person trapped in fear often finds themselves exhausted, overthinking every interaction, analyzing every word, and searching for signs that they are still wanted. The tragedy is that fear creates the very outcomes it hopes to avoid. When a person becomes consumed by the need for reassurance, they often stop showing up as their authentic self. They begin performing instead of connecting. They become focused on being chosen rather than being genuine. Their attention shifts away from their own growth, purpose, and well-being and toward controlling how another person feels about them. A strong person eventually realizes that love and fear pull in opposite directions. Fear says, hold tighter. Love says, allow space. Fear says, prove your worth. Love says, recognize your worth. Fear says, chase them so they won't leave. Love says, if they leave, you will still be whole. This realization changes everything. The need to chase begins to fade because self-worth is no longer tied to another person's response. There is no longer a desperate need to convince, persuade, or earn what should be given freely. Instead, there is calmness. There is patience. There is confidence in knowing that genuine connection cannot be forced and that the right people do not need endless pursuit to recognize your value. The moment fear loses its grip, relationships stop being a battlefield for validation and become an opportunity for authentic connection built on mutual choice rather than emotional dependence. Many people assume that what hurts the most in a relationship is the loss of attention. They believe that when someone stops texting, stops calling, or stops showing interest, the pain comes from the disappearance of those actions. But the deeper wound is often something far more powerful. It is the loss of certainty. Human beings are creatures of patterns. We become comfortable with what is predictable. We find security in knowing what will happen next, even when we claim we do not. When someone consistently pursues another person, a silent expectation begins to form. The messages arrive, the effort remains constant. The attention is always available. Over time, this becomes normal. It becomes part of the emotional environment. The person receiving that attention may stop noticing its value because it feels guaranteed. Like the air in a room, it is always there, so it rarely becomes the focus of appreciation. The real shock comes when that certainty suddenly disappears. The message that always arrived does not come. The person who always reached out remains silent. The effort that was once predictable is no longer present. In that moment, the mind is forced into unfamiliar territory. Questions begin to emerge, not because attention itself was lost, but because certainty has been broken. The pattern has changed. The emotional comfort that depended on predictability has vanished. This is why people often become more affected by absence than by presence. Presence can become invisible when it is expected. Absence cannot. Absence demands attention. It forces awareness. It creates a space where certainty once lived, and the mind naturally tries to fill that space with explanations. Why did they stop? What changed? Are they still thinking about me? Do they no longer care? These questions are powerful because they reveal how much emotional security was attached to the predictable behavior of another person. When certainty exists, there is little reason to reflect deeply. People often move through relationships on autopilot, assuming that tomorrow will look exactly like today. But when certainty disappears, awareness awakens. The mind begins to examine what it once overlooked. There is a profound lesson hidden within this experience. Many people mistake consistency for permanence. They assume that because someone has always been there, they always will be. They stop appreciating the effort behind the attention. They stop recognizing the emotional investment being offered. Not out of cruelty, but because familiarity has a way of making valuable things seem ordinary. The moment certainty is removed, value becomes visible. Suddenly, the person who was once taken for granted becomes impossible to ignore. Their absence echoes louder than their presence ever did. The routines they created, the energy they invested, and the emotional stability they provided all become clear at once. This is why the loss of certainty can be so unsettling. It confronts people with a reality they did not expect. It reminds them that nothing should be assumed. It forces them to see what was always there but rarely appreciated. And in that realization, they are no longer reacting merely to the absence of attention. They are reacting to the collapse of a certainty they believed would never disappear. And that realization can be far more painful than silence itself. One of the most fascinating aspects of human nature is how easily people become blind to what is consistently present in their lives. Something can hold tremendous value, yet because it is always available, it gradually fades into the background of awareness. This does not happen because people are ungrateful. It happens because the mind is designed to adapt. What was once exciting becomes familiar. What was once deeply appreciated becomes expected. And what becomes expected often stops being fully seen. This is why absence has such a powerful effect on perception. When something valuable is removed, the mind suddenly notices the space it occupied. The conversations that seemed ordinary become memorable. The attention that felt routine becomes meaningful. The presence that was once taken for granted becomes impossible to ignore. In many cases, the value was always there. The person simply did not recognize it while it was constantly available. Think about how often people overlook the significance of another person's effort. A message every morning, a supportive conversation after a difficult day, a consistent display of care and attention. These actions can become so familiar that they lose their emotional impact. Not because they matter less, but because the human mind grows accustomed to them. Familiarity creates comfort, but it can also create blindness. The moment that consistency disappears, awareness returns. Suddenly, there is silence where there was once connection. There is distance where there was once presence. The emotional support that seemed ordinary now feels irreplaceable. The absence creates contrast, and contrast reveals value. Without contrast, many things remain invisible. This principle extends far beyond relationships. People often fail to appreciate their health until illness arrives. They overlook their freedom until it is restricted. They ignore opportunities until those opportunities disappear. Value is frequently recognized not when something is present, but when it is absent. The loss does not create the value. The loss simply exposes the value that already existed. In relationships, this realization can be especially powerful. When someone spends months or years offering genuine care, their efforts can become part of the emotional landscape. The other person may assume that the attention will always be there. They may stop noticing the sacrifices being made. They may stop recognizing the emotional investment being offered. Then one day the effort stops, the pursuit ends, the energy is withdrawn. That is when a deeper understanding often begins. The mind starts revisiting memories. It starts comparing the present reality with the past. It notices what is missing. It begins to understand the role that person played in creating comfort, stability, and connection. What seemed ordinary is suddenly revealed as extraordinary. This is why absence can be such a powerful teacher. It strips away assumptions. It removes the illusion that valuable things are guaranteed. It forces people to look directly at what they once overlooked. In that moment, appreciation becomes possible because awareness has returned. The deepest lesson is that true value does not depend on recognition. Something can be incredibly valuable even when nobody notices it. The sun remains valuable whether people admire it or not. Loyalty remains valuable whether it is praised or ignored. Genuine care remains valuable whether it is acknowledged or taken for granted. Absence simply shines a light on what was already precious, allowing people to finally see what had been standing before them all along. There is a significant difference between seeking connection and seeking validation. One comes from a place of wholeness, while the other comes from a place of lack. Many people confuse the two. They believe that constantly proving themselves, chasing approval, and trying to earn someone's attention will make them more attractive. In reality, these behaviors often communicate something very different. They reveal uncertainty about one's own worth. The more a person depends on external validation to feel valuable, the more they surrender their emotional power to the opinions and reactions of others. Desperation is rarely loud at first. It often begins as a subtle need for reassurance. A person starts checking their phone repeatedly, wondering if a message has arrived. They become overly concerned with how they are perceived. They analyze conversations, search for signs of approval, and adjust their behavior in an attempt to secure affection. Over time, their focus shifts away from being authentic and toward being accepted. Instead of expressing who they truly are, they begin performing a version of themselves that they believe others will like. The problem with this approach is that no amount of external approval can permanently satisfy internal insecurity. Validation may create temporary relief, but it does not create lasting confidence. The moment approval disappears, anxiety returns. The person finds themselves trapped in an endless cycle of seeking reassurance, receiving it briefly, and then needing more. Their self-worth becomes dependent on circumstances they cannot control. Self-respect operates in a completely different way. It is rooted in the understanding that your value exists independently of another person's opinion. It does not require constant confirmation from the outside world. A person with self-respect recognizes their strengths and weaknesses without allowing either to define their entire identity. They do not need to convince others of their worth because they have already accepted it themselves. This inner stability creates a powerful presence. When someone respects themselves, they naturally establish healthy boundaries. They do not tolerate disrespect in exchange for attention. They do not abandon their values to gain approval. They do not chase people who consistently fail to appreciate them. Instead, they approach relationships from a position of choice rather than need. Ironically, this is often what makes a person more attractive. People are naturally drawn to those who possess a sense of inner certainty. Confidence communicates that a person's happiness is not entirely dependent on external circumstances. It suggests emotional maturity and self-awareness. Unlike desperation, which seeks to pull others closer through pressure and neediness, self-respect creates space. It allows relationships to develop naturally without force. There is also a quiet strength in knowing when to walk away. Many people remain in unhealthy situations because they fear being alone. They tolerate inconsistency, neglect, and disrespect because they believe losing the relationship would be worse than losing themselves. Self-respect refuses to make that trade. It understands that maintaining personal dignity is more important than holding on to a connection that requires constant self sacrifice. When a person stops seeking validation and starts valuing themselves, their entire energy changes. Their decisions become clearer. Their emotions become more stable. They stop begging for what should be given freely. They stop measuring their worth by someone else's attention. They begin to understand that genuine attraction is not created by proving your value repeatedly. It emerges naturally when you recognize your value first and refuse to compromise it for temporary approval. One of the greatest sources of human suffering is the belief that we can control what exists outside of us. People spend countless hours trying to influence how others think, feel, and behave. They carefully choose their words, adjust their actions, and constantly analyze situations in hopes of creating a specific outcome. They want someone to love them, appreciate them, understand them, or stay with them. While these desires are natural, problems begin when a person's peace becomes dependent on whether those desires are fulfilled. The reality is that every human being possesses their own thoughts, emotions, experiences, and choices. No matter how much effort you invest, you cannot force another person to feel something they are unwilling or unable to feel. You cannot make someone value what they do not yet understand. You cannot guarantee loyalty, affection, or commitment through persuasion alone. Yet many people continue trying. They exhaust themselves attempting to control outcomes that have never truly belonged to them. This is where the wisdom of Stoicism becomes so powerful. Stoicism teaches that there is a clear distinction between what we can control and what we cannot. We can control our actions, our responses, our character, and the choices we make. We cannot control another person's feelings, decisions, or perceptions. The moment we confuse these two categories, frustration begins to grow. We become trapped in a battle we cannot win because we are fighting against the fundamental reality of human freedom. Consider how much emotional energy is spent trying to change someone else's mind. A person may repeatedly explain their value, hoping to be appreciated. They may constantly give more, hoping their efforts will eventually be recognized. They may chase, persuade, and prove themselves, believing that enough effort will finally produce the desired response. Yet, the more they try to force the outcome, the more exhausted they become. Their focus shifts away from their own growth and toward controlling something that remains outside their reach. Releasing the need for control does not mean becoming indifferent. It does not mean giving up on relationships or refusing to care about people. Instead, it means accepting reality as it is rather than demanding that it be different. It means understanding that genuine connection cannot be forced. If someone chooses to stay, their choice has meaning because it is freely given. If someone chooses to leave, no amount of control could have created a truly healthy relationship anyway. There is tremendous freedom in this realization. When you stop trying to manage another person's emotions, you reclaim your own. The endless cycle of overthinking begins to lose its power. You stop interpreting every message, every delay, and every interaction as a reflection of your worth. You understand that another person's choices reveal their path, not your value. Peace emerges when you redirect your attention inward. Instead of asking how to make someone love you, you ask how to become the best version of yourself. Instead of focusing on whether someone approves of you, you focus on whether you approve of your own actions. Your energy moves away from chasing outcomes and toward building character, resilience, and inner stability. The more deeply you embrace this principle, the less power external circumstances have over your emotional state. You no longer depend on controlling others to feel secure. You no longer treat another person's decisions as the foundation of your happiness. You learn that true strength comes from mastering yourself, because that is the one domain that has always been within your control. Many people spend years searching for power in places where it cannot truly be found. They look for it in attention, approval, relationships, status, and validation from others. They believe that if the right person chooses them, appreciates them, or loves them, they will finally feel complete. For a while, this belief may seem convincing. The attention of another person can create temporary confidence. Their affection can create temporary security. Their presence can create temporary happiness. But the moment those things begin to fade, the feeling of power fades with them. What seemed like strength is revealed to be dependence. Real power begins the moment a person returns to themselves. This return often happens after disappointment. It happens when chasing no longer works. It happens when endless effort produces little reward. It happens when someone finally becomes exhausted from seeking externally what can only be developed internally. At first, this realization can feel painful because it forces a person to confront how much of their energy has been invested in trying to gain approval from others. When people lose themselves in pursuit of someone else, they gradually disconnect from their own needs, goals, and identity. Their thoughts become consumed by another person's reactions. Their emotional state becomes dependent on another person's behavior. Their sense of worth becomes attached to another person's choices. Without realizing it, they hand over their power piece by piece until they no longer recognize how much of themselves they have sacrificed. Returning to yourself means reversing that process. It means remembering the dreams you neglected while focusing on someone else's attention. It means reconnecting with the goals that once inspired you. It means investing energy into your own growth rather than constantly monitoring another person's feelings. It means asking yourself difficult questions about who you are outside of any relationship. This process creates a profound shift. Instead of waking up wondering how to gain someone's attention, you begin asking how to improve your own life. Instead of measuring your value through another person's approval, you begin measuring it through your character, discipline, and actions. Instead of waiting for someone else to make you feel complete, you start building a life that already feels meaningful. The remarkable thing is that reclaiming your power does not require controlling anyone else. It does not require winning arguments, proving your worth, or making someone regret losing you. Those goals still place your focus on external validation. True power is quieter than that. It emerges when your sense of self becomes independent of how others respond to you. A person who has returned to themselves carries a different energy. They are no longer desperate for recognition because they recognize themselves. They are no longer afraid of rejection because they understand that rejection cannot define their worth. They are no longer controlled by the fear of being alone because they have learned how to be at peace in their own company. This does not mean they stop caring about others. It means they stop abandoning themselves for others. They learn that healthy relationships are built between two whole individuals, not between one person seeking validation and another person providing it. Their confidence becomes rooted in something deeper than attention. Their stability comes from within rather than from circumstances they cannot control. The moment a person truly returns to themselves, they discover something that was hidden beneath all the chasing, proving, and seeking. The strength they were looking for was never in another person's hands. It was always within them, waiting to be reclaimed the moment they chose themselves.